Welcome to the Twisted CaseFiles. Step into the shadows where reality blurs with the eerie unknown. Here, every story unravels a chilling mystery, every case plunges deep into the haunting secrets of the human mind and far beyond. In this twisted world, danger lurks in the corners of the mundane, the supernatural hides in plain sight, and the bravest souls dare to tread where others fear to look. Today, we open the file on one of the most spine-chilling and enigmatic tales yet, the Crimson Carnival. A story of cursed machinery, ancient rituals, and the relentless pursuit of truth. Detective Victor Graves and his trusted friend Lucien Drake navigate through a sinister carnival, a place where wonder and terror collide, and where every turn hides a secret darker than the last. So, turn down the lights, brace yourself, and join us as we dive into the depths of the Crimson Carnival, only on the Twisted CaseFiles. The truth may set you free, but first, it will unnerve you. So let's begin. Waxen Grove in the dead of summer was like a painting left too long in the sun, faded at the edges, smudged in places, yet still holding a trace of its former vibrancy. The air hung thick and heavy with the scent of freshly cut grass and earth baked by relentless heat. But tonight, for the first time in months, the town came alive. The arrival of the Crimson Carnival was all anyone could talk about. Its bright tents sprawled across the outskirts of town like giant flowers blooming in defiance of the dry season. Even I couldn't help but be drawn to its audacious promise of spectacle and escape. Victor Graves, my dear friend and frequent companion in these bizarre investigations, was less easily impressed. He stood beside me in his neatly pressed shirt and long coat, completely incongruous attire for such weather, and surveyed the distant carnival lights with the keen gaze of a predator sizing up its prey. "It's wrong," he muttered, his voice like gravel underfoot. "What's wrong?" I asked, though I could guess his answer. Victor saw shadows where most saw light. It wasn't pessimism, it was instinct. The setup. The way they've planted themselves on the edge of town, like they're waiting for something. He gestured toward the sprawling carnival grounds. Carnivals are meant to be lively, chaotic. This one feels calculated. I frowned, considering his words. To most eyes, the Crimson Carnival was exactly as advertised, a marvel of swirling colors and joyous noise. But Victor had always been more perceptive, and he had a way of twisting your perspective until you saw things through his eyes. Calculated or not, I said, it's drawing the town's entire population out here tonight. We're going to have to wade through half the county to get close to that carousel. Victor's expression remained unreadable as he adjusted his hat. Then let's not waste time. The closer we got to the carnival grounds, the thicker the air seemed to grow, not with heat, but with a strange, almost tangible tension. The calliope music, whimsical and bright, drifted on the breeze in sharp contrast to the somber undertones Victor had already pointed out. A sea of locals flooded past us, eager to lose themselves in the festivities. Children squealed with delight as their parents struggled to keep up, young couples strolled arm in arm, and solitary figures flitted through the crowd like moths drawn to a flame. Victor, however, moved with deliberate focus, his every step echoing with authority. He didn't look at the carnival goers, his eyes were fixed ahead, scanning for anything out of place. I followed close behind, notebook tucked under my arm, scribbling down observations as discreetly as possible. The first person who caught my attention wasn't a performer, nor was it any of the carnival staff. It was a girl, no older than 8 or 9, standing just outside the carousel's radius of light. She held a crimson ticket in one hand and stared at the carousel with such intensity that it made me shiver. Victor, too, seemed to notice her, though he didn't say anything until we were close enough for her to feel his presence. She glanced up, her eyes meeting his, and for the briefest moment, I swore I saw recognition flicker across her face. But then she smiled, a childlike grin that seemed almost too perfect, too rehearsed. "You here to ride the carousel?" she asked innocently. Victor tilted his head, studying her with that impenetrable gaze of his. "No, we're here to look at it." The girl's smile faltered slightly. She hesitated, her crimson ticket trembling in her hand. "It's pretty, isn't it?" she said at last. "You should be careful, though. Some people don't come back." Victor didn't respond, nor did I. He simply nodded to her before moving on, leaving me to scramble after him with my thoughts spinning like one of the carousel's painted horses. The carousel itself was both mesmerizing and repellent. Its lights gleamed in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, and its horses, carved with extraordinary detail, seemed alive with motion even as they stood still. But there was something inherently wrong about it. I couldn't explain it, but every instinct I had screamed that this machine was not meant to exist. Victor was already moving around the perimeter, his fingers brushing against the railings, his sharp eyes scanning every inch of the structure. I stayed back, jotting down notes on the carousel's peculiarities, the chipped paint that somehow retained its vibrancy, the subtle patterns etched into the horses' saddles that looked almost like symbols. "Lucien," Victor called suddenly, his voice snapping me out of my thoughts. "What is it?" I asked, stepping closer. He pointed to one of the horses near the edge of the carousel. Its eyes, glass orbs embedded in the wood, seemed to glow faintly, as though reflecting light that wasn't there. "Look at the carvings beneath the saddle." I crouched beside him, peering at the intricate designs. At first, they seemed like decorative flourishes, swirls, and spirals too fine to be random. But then I saw it, a symbol etched in the wood, unmistakably Romani in origin. I'd seen something similar in one of my textbooks on folklore, and the memory hit me like a thunderclap. "It's protective magic," I murmured. "Or at least, it's meant to be. But something's twisted it." Victor didn't say anything. He simply straightened and resumed his inspection, leaving me to grapple with the implications of what I'd just seen. If the carousel was built with protective magic, why had it become the source of so much death and destruction? What had changed? By the time we finished our initial inspection, the carnival had begun to quiet down. The calliope music played on, but the crowd had thinned considerably, leaving the grounds eerily still. Victor and I returned to the carousel, our earlier unease compounded by the emptiness surrounding it. "What are you thinking?" I asked, breaking the silence. Victor glanced at me, his expression unreadable as ever. "I'm thinking we don't have nearly enough answers." I sighed, closing my notebook and tucking it back under my arm. "We have a starting point. The symbol on the saddle, it's tied to something bigger. If we can trace it back to its origin, we might learn what happened." Victor nodded, but his gaze remained fixed on the carousel. I couldn't tell if he was lost in thought or simply unwilling to leave it behind. Either way, I knew we were only at the beginning of something far darker than either of us could anticipate. The carousel was haunting me. Its colors, crimson and gold, vibrant yet somehow faded, were etched into my mind like a persistent shadow. As we walked away from the carnival that night, the oppressive weight it carried seemed to follow us, clinging to the air like humidity. Victor, as usual, was unreadable, though I could tell by his measured pace that something about the carousel had unsettled him. It wasn't until we reached the edge of town and the carnival's music had faded entirely that he finally spoke. "Lucien," he said, his voice sharp and steady, "tomorrow we start early." "Early?" I repeated, though I knew better than to question him outright. "Why the rush?" Victor stopped in his tracks and turned his head just enough for me to catch the gleam in his eye under his hat's brim. "Because we're already being watched." I froze, my stomach flipping as I instinctively glanced behind us. The streets were deserted save for a stray dog ambling across the road. Watched? By who? Not who, Victor corrected. What? The next morning came too quickly for my taste. The heat hadn't relented, and I found myself regretting my choice of long sleeves as we headed back toward the carnival. Victor had insisted we arrive before it opened, claiming the hours just after dawn often held the most valuable clues, something about the way the world was still waking up, unaware of prying eyes. The carnival grounds were eerily quiet without the throngs of people and noise. The bright colors of the tents seemed muted under the pale light of morning, and the air was thick with the smell of earth and stale popcorn. Even the carousel was still, its horses frozen mid-leap like predators lying in wait. Victor wasted no time. He marched straight toward the carousel, his footsteps kicking up dust with each deliberate step. I followed close behind, casting nervous glances at the performers milling about the grounds. Most of them ignored us, but I caught a few lingering stares, unnervingly blank expressions that felt far too deliberate. "I don't like this," I muttered under my breath. "Noted," Victor replied without slowing. When we reached the carousel, Victor immediately began inspecting the machinery, crouching low to examine the inner workings. I stood nearby, taking notes on the carvings and symbols I'd missed the night before. The Romani etchings beneath the horses' saddles were still visible, though they seemed even more distorted in the harsh light of day. The patterns had a hypnotic quality, drawing my gaze in ways I couldn't explain. "Lucien," Victor called, his voice startling me out of my trance. "What is it?" I asked, stepping closer. Victor straightened, holding a small object between his fingers, a piece of fabric, frayed at the edges and stained a deep crimson. "This was caught in the gears," he said, his tone flat. "Fabric?" I frowned, studying it more closely. It looked old, the kind of textile you might find in a costume trunk from decades past. But the stain, it wasn't just crimson. It was dark, almost black. Blood, I realized with a sinking feeling. Victor didn't need to voice the conclusion, we both knew what it meant. Our investigation continued in silence, each discovery deepening the pit in my stomach. Victor found more signs of tampering within the machinery, scratches that looked like claw marks, broken bolts that had been replaced haphazardly, and faint scorch marks that shouldn't have existed in metal untouched by fire. Meanwhile, my focus remained on the carvings. I traced the patterns with my fingers, noting their delicate craftsmanship. They were undeniably beautiful, but there was something dark about them, something that twisted their elegance into menace. I flipped through my notebook, searching for references to similar symbols. Romani folklore was rich with protective charms, but these carvings didn't align with anything I'd studied. They were unique and dangerous. By mid-morning, the carnival staff began preparing for the day. Performers emerged from their tents, their faces painted with exaggerated smiles that felt more unsettling than playful. A man dressed as a clown passed us, his red-painted grin stretching unnaturally wide. His eyes met mine for a fleeting moment, and I felt a chill crawl down my spine. Victor, noticing my discomfort, stepped closer. "You need to focus," he said simply. "I am focused," I snapped, though my trembling hands betrayed me. Victor didn't reply. Instead, he pulled a worn photograph from his coat pocket and handed it to me. The image was black and white, depicting a younger Victor standing beside a carousel eerily similar to the one before us. The craftsmanship, the symbols, everything about it was identical. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Victor's expression was grim. "The first case I ever took." I stared at the photo, my mind racing. Victor rarely spoke of his early cases, especially those tied to the supernatural. But this photograph, it was undeniable proof of something far beyond coincidence. Before I could press him further, a commotion erupted near the carousel. A performer dressed in a flowing crimson gown was arguing with a man I recognized as the Carnival's owner, a short, stout man with a face like a bulldog. Their voices carried across the grounds, sharp and heated. Victor and I moved closer, keeping our distance as we eavesdropped. "You need to get rid of it," the performer hissed, her voice trembling with desperation. "Get rid of what?" the owner demanded, his tone mocking. "The carousel? The moneymaker? Don't be ridiculous." "It's killing people," she shot back. "It's cursed." The words sent a ripple of unease through the crowd that had begun to gather. The owner's face darkened, and he stepped closer to the performer, his presence looming. "You don't know what you're talking about." Victor, sensing an opportunity, stepped forward. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked, his calm tone cutting through the tension like a blade. The owner turned to him, his expression sour. "It's nothing. Just a disagreement." Victor raised an eyebrow. "Disagreements don't usually involve curses." The performer's eyes darted to Victor, wide with fear. She opened her mouth to speak, but was quickly silenced by the owner's sharp glare. "It's nothing," he repeated, his voice firm. Victor didn't press further, though I could tell he wasn't satisfied. He nodded politely and turned away, signaling for me to follow. As we walked, Victor's pace quickened, his mind clearly racing. "We need to find that performer," he said, his voice low. "She's scared," I replied. "I doubt she'll talk to us." "She will," Victor said, his tone resolute. "She doesn't have a choice." I didn't argue. Victor's instincts were rarely wrong, and the urgency in his voice was enough to silence my doubts. As we left the carnival grounds, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were stepping deeper into something far darker than either of us had anticipated. The performer's silhouette was a blur as she vanished behind one of the crimson tents. Victor didn't hesitate, his long stride was determined, cutting through the bustle of carnival workers preparing for the evening crowd. I quickened my pace to keep up, sweat gathering under my collar in the oppressive midday heat. The tension from the confrontation moments earlier still hung heavy in the air. "She's not going to talk willingly," I warned as we wove through the labyrinth of tents and carts. The scent of grease paint and sawdust was almost overwhelming, mixing with the cloying sweetness of candied apples carried on a faint breeze. Victor glanced over his shoulder, his expression cool and unreadable. "They never do. But she knows something. We're not leaving until we find out what." I swallowed my unease, clutching my notebook tightly. The farther we ventured into the carnival's underbelly, the stranger everything felt. The bright colors of the tent seemed muted, their fabric sagging as if the weight of unseen eyes pressed against them. Voices murmured nearby, the workers calling to one another in hushed tones, but their words were unintelligible, muffled like whispers trapped in a dream. When we finally spotted the performer again, she was crouched beside a crate, her crimson gown pooling around her like blood. Her fingers fumbled with something metallic, a clasp, perhaps, on a trunk marked with symbols I didn't recognize. She didn't notice us until Victor's shadow fell over her. She froze, her head snapping up, wide eyes locking onto his face. "You again," she muttered, her voice sharp with annoyance but trembling just enough to betray fear. "I told you, there's nothing to discuss." Victor crouched to her level, his gaze piercing. "You said it was cursed. That people were dying because of it. If that's the case, why are you still here?" Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she turned her focus back to the trunk, snapping it shut with a defiant click. "You wouldn't understand," she muttered, rising to her feet. "Try me," Victor said, his tone edged with steel. I stepped forward, hesitating. He's right. We're not here to make trouble, or we're here to help. My voice sounded unconvincing even to my own ears, but her gaze flicked to me, lingering for a moment before softening ever so slightly. "You can't help," she said finally. "No one can. That thing, it doesn't belong here. It should never have been brought here in the first place." Her words sent a shiver down my spine, and I opened my notebook, hastily jotting down her cryptic statement. "What do you mean?" I pressed. "Where did it come from?" She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting someone, or something, to emerge from the shadows. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "It was stolen. Decades ago, from people who knew its power. It was meant to be buried, forgotten." But her voice broke off, and she shook her head, her hands gripping the edges of her gown. "But someone brought it here," Victor finished for her, his tone matter-of-fact. She nodded reluctantly. "The owner," she spat, the word dripping with disdain. "He knew what it was. He didn't care. All he saw was money." I exchanged a glance with Victor, my mind racing. If what she was saying was true, then the Carnival owner had knowingly unleashed something dangerous, something capable of leaving a trail of death in its wake. Victor stood, his tall frame casting a shadow over her. "What exactly is it? Who created it?" Her eyes darted to mine, searching, pleading. "It's not natural. It's alive in a way it shouldn't be. The man who made it, she cut herself off abruptly as the sound of heavy footsteps approached, her expression twisting into panic. "I can't, I've said too much." Before we could stop her, she darted between the tents, disappearing into the maze of fabric and shadows. Victor made a move to follow, but I placed a hand on his arm, shaking my head. "We're not going to get more out of her. She's terrified." "She knows more," Victor said, though he didn't sound angry, more frustrated, perhaps, or resigned. He exhaled slowly, his eyes scanning the area. "But she's given us enough for now." I frowned, still clutching my notebook as if it were a lifeline. "Do you think the owner's behind this? That he's been using it, whatever it is, for his own gain?" Victor didn't answer immediately. His gaze lingered on the spot where the performer had vanished, his brow furrowing in thought. Finally, he turned to me, his expression grim. "If he is, we'll find out soon enough." The rest of the day passed in a blur of heat and unease. Victor and I kept to the outskirts of the Carnival, observing its operations from a distance. The Carousel stood at the center of it all, its golden lights flickering as the evening crowd began to pour in. It seemed to pulse with life, its painted horses frozen in mid-leap, their glassy eyes glinting in the twilight. "Does it seem different to you?" I asked quietly, unable to tear my gaze away from the cursed contraption. Victor didn't respond at first. Then, after a long pause, he said, "It's waiting." I blinked, taken aback. "Waiting? For what?" "For its next victim," he said simply, his voice devoid of emotion. The weight of his words settled heavily on my chest, and I forced myself to look away, focusing instead on the sea of carnival goers around us. Laughter and music filled the air, but it all felt hollow, like a thin veil stretched over something rotten. Victor nudged me with his elbow, drawing my attention back to the carousel. "Look!" I followed his gaze, my breath catching as I spotted the performer, the same woman from earlier, standing near the carousel's edge. She wasn't moving, she seemed rooted to the spot, her crimson gown billowing slightly in the evening breeze. Her face was pale, almost ashen, her eyes fixed on the carousel with an expression of utter dread. Before I could react, a young boy ran past her, clutching a crimson ticket in his hand. He climbed onto one of the carousel's horses, his laughter ringing out as the machine whirred to life. The performer's mouth opened in a silent scream, her hands reaching out as if to pull him back, but it was too late. The carousel spun faster and faster, its lights blazing unnaturally bright, casting eerie shadows across the crowd. And then, without warning, the music stopped. The carousel ground to a halt, its lights flickering before plunging into darkness. A hushed silence fell over the crowd, and all eyes turned to the carousel. The boy was gone. The boy's disappearance hit like the crash of distant thunder, rippling through the crowd in waves of panic and confusion. Gasps gave way to frantic murmurs, and the air grew taut with fear. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the now stilled carousel, its crimson and gold lights dimmed as if it, too, had lost its vitality. Victor acted first. He always did. His hand gripped my arm, steering me forward as the crowd began to close in around the ride. "Stay close," he said sharply, his voice cutting through the chaotic din. The commanding edge to his tone snapped me into motion. The boy's mother, a thin, pale woman with hair the color of wheat, was screaming his name. "Joshua! Joshua, where are you?" Her voice cracked on the last syllable, and she began to claw at the carousel's railings, her fingernails scraping against the faded wood as she tried to pull herself onto the platform. Two carnival workers appeared, their uniforms rumpled and their faces drawn with unease. One of them, a lanky man with sunken eyes, attempted to pull the woman back. "Please," he said, though his own voice quavered. "We'll find him, I swear." "You'll find him," she shrieked, wrenching her arm free. "He was right there. How could he just vanish?" Victor pushed through the crowd and placed himself between the mother and the workers. "Where was he sitting?" he asked, his tone calm but unyielding. The mother turned to him, her breath hitching as she tried to form words. The white horse with the golden mane," she stammered. "He was laughing, and then he was just gone." Victor nodded, his gaze darting to the carousel. "Lucien," he said without looking back, "document everything. Every detail." I fumbled for my notebook, the weight of the moment making my hands tremble. As I began to sketch the scene, noting the positions of the horses and the arrangement of the platform, Victor stepped onto the carousel. It creaked under his weight, a low, mournful sound that made my skin crawl. The crowd had grown quieter now, their fear morphing into a hushed, expectant silence. All eyes were on Victor as he moved around the carousel, his fingers brushing against the horse's flanks, their frozen expression seeming to watch him in return. He stopped in front of the white horse, its golden mane shimmering dully in the fading light. "There's nothing here," Victor said finally, stepping back. His voice was steady, but his brow was furrowed in thought. "No hidden panels, no mechanisms. It's just wood." "Then where is he?" the mother demanded, her voice breaking. Tears streamed down her face, carving tracks through the dust on her cheeks. Victor didn't answer her directly. Instead, he turned to the Carnival workers. "Who's responsible for maintaining this carousel?" The two men exchanged nervous glances. The lanky one cleared his throat. "That'd be Benny. Benny's the mechanic." "Where is he now?" Victor asked. The other worker, a stocky man with a sweat-streaked face, shifted uncomfortably. He doesn't come around much during the day. Prefers to work at night, when it's quieter." Victor's eyes narrowed. "Convenient. Where can I find him?" The stocky man pointed toward the far end of the Carnival grounds, where the outline of a rusted trailer was barely visible through the haze of dust and heat. "That's his place. But he ain't exactly sociable." "I'll take my chances," Victor said, stepping down from the carousel. He motioned for me to follow, and I hurried to keep pace as he cut through the crowd. The walk to Benny's trailer was marked by an oppressive silence, broken only by the distant hum of the calliope and the occasional murmur of the Carnival workers preparing for the evening rush. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward us like grasping fingers. Victor's stride was purposeful, his jaw set in that familiar way that told me his mind was working through every possible angle. I tried to keep up, my notebook clutched to my chest like a shield. "Do you think Benny's involved?" I asked, my voice breaking the stillness. "Too early to tell," Victor replied without breaking stride. "But he knows something. He has to." The trailer loomed ahead, its once white paint now chipped and streaked with rust. A collection of tools and machinery parts was scattered haphazardly around the entrance, and the faint smell of grease and oil hung in the air. Victor knocked on the door, his fist striking the metal with a dull thud. "Benny," he called, his tone firm but not aggressive. "We need to talk." There was no response. Victor knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. He glanced at me, then reached for the door handle. It creaked open under his touch, revealing a dimly lit interior cluttered with tools, papers, and half-empty bottles. The air inside was stifling, heavy with the smell of sweat and stale alcohol. "Benny?" Victor called again, stepping inside. The trailer was empty, but it was far from abandoned. A workbench along the far wall was covered in blueprints and diagrams, many of which appeared to be sketches of the carousel. I moved closer, my curiosity piqued, and began to sift through the papers. "Look at this," I said, holding up a torn page that featured a detailed drawing of one of the horses. Notes were scribbled in the margins, symbols and equations that I couldn't make sense of, but which carried an undeniable air of the arcane. Victor took the page from me, his eyes scanning it intently. "This isn't just engineering," he muttered. "This is ritualistic." Before I could respond, the sound of footsteps on gravel reached our ears. Victor turned sharply, his hand moving instinctively toward the revolver at his hip. A moment later, a figure appeared in the doorway, a wiry man with oil-streaked hands and a face lined with years of hard living. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice rough and defensive. Victor didn't flinch. "Victor Graves." This is Lucien Drake. We're investigating the disappearance of a boy from your carousel." Benny's expression darkened, his gaze darting to the papers on the workbench. "I don't know anything about that," he said quickly, too quickly. "Then you won't mind answering a few questions," Victor said, stepping closer. His presence was commanding, and even Benny seemed to shrink under the weight of his stare. For a moment, Benny hesitated, his hands fidgeting nervously at his sides. Then, with a heavy sigh, he nodded. "Fine. But you'd better make it quick." Victor nodded, his expression unreadable. "Start with this," he said, holding up the torn page. "What do these symbols mean?" Benny's eyes widened, and he took a step back as if the paper itself was dangerous. I don't know," he stammered. "I just copied them from the original designs. The owner said they were part of the aesthetic, that they'd make the ride more authentic." Victor's gaze hardened. "And you didn't think to question that?" Benny's shoulders slumped, his defiance giving way to exhaustion. "Look, I just fix the damn thing when it breaks. That's all. Whatever's going on, it's above my pay grade." Victor exchanged a glance with me, his jaw tightening. There was more to Benny's story, of that I was certain. But for now, it was clear he was just another pawn in a game neither of us fully understood. As we left the trailer, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the Carnival in shades of crimson and shadow. The carousel's lights flickered to life, their golden glow cutting through the darkness like a beacon. And as I looked back, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The rusted door of Benny's trailer slammed shut behind us, the sound reverberating through the quiet Carnival grounds. It felt as though every creak of the wind, every faint whisper of the calliope, was watching us leave. Victor's strides were long and purposeful as he led the way, his hat brimmed low over his brow, casting a shadow over his expression. I struggled to keep up, my mind racing to piece together everything we'd just learned, or, rather, everything Benny had deliberately avoided telling us. The air felt heavier now, as though it carried more than heat and dust. I kept glancing over my shoulder, convinced that someone, or something, was following. Even the colors of the Carnival seemed wrong, their vibrancy now muted under the dying light of the day. The carousel's golden glow, in particular, seemed menacing, as if it were daring us to look too closely. Victor spoke without looking at me. "What do you make of him?" "Benny?" I asked, my voice strained from the oppressive silence between us. "He's hiding something, that's for sure. But he's terrified. That wasn't just fear of getting caught, it was deeper. Like he knows whatever's happening is beyond his control." Victor nodded curtly, his eyes scanning the path ahead. He was always like this after interrogations, detached, his thoughts locked away where even I couldn't pry. "He's scared of the owner," he said after a moment, "but he's more scared of the carousel." That much was clear. Benny's reluctance, his darting eyes, the tremble in his hands when Victor had questioned him, it all pointed to a truth he wasn't willing to admit. I tried to suppress a shiver, but the weight of Victor's words settled into my chest like lead. We reached the edge of the Carnival grounds, where the chaotic noise of the evening crowd had begun to swell. The calliope music had resumed, its jaunty notes grating against my nerves. Victor stopped abruptly, his gaze fixed on the swirling lights of the carousel in the distance. "It's not just the boy," he said quietly. "This has been going on for years." I frowned, stepping closer. "You're talking about the deaths?" He nodded. "Everywhere this carnival goes, people vanish. Some are children, some aren't. But it's always the same, Disappearances with no explanation, bodies never found. The only constant is the carousel. I felt a chill creep up my spine, despite the stifling heat. Why hasn't anyone shut it down? Surely someone must have noticed the pattern. Victor's lips pressed into a thin line. That's what we're here to find out. The crowd had thickened by the time we returned to the heart of the carnival. Laughter and chatter mingled with the music, masking the undercurrent of unease that Victor and I carried with us. Brightly dressed performers flitted between the throngs of people, their painted smiles stretched wide, their eyes unnervingly blank. I made a point to avoid their gaze, though I felt their presence like a prickling at the back of my neck. Victor moved with purpose, his shoulders cutting through the crowd like a knife through water. I followed closely, my notebook clutched tightly in one hand. We were headed for the carousel again, though I wasn't sure what more we could learn from it. The ride was alive with motion now, its painted horses leaping and galloping as it spun, the golden lights casting flickering shadows across the faces of the passengers. I spotted the boy's mother standing near the edge of the crowd, her face pale and drawn as she clutched the railing of the carousel. She looked like she hadn't moved since we'd left her, her eyes fixed on the white horse with the golden manet. I didn't blame her. The thought of her son's laughter, so joyous, so innocent, being swallowed whole by that cursed contraption was enough to make my stomach churn. Victor approached her without hesitation, his voice low and steady as he spoke. "Mrs. Dalton," he said, and I was surprised by the softness in his tone. "You should go home. There's nothing more you can do here." She shook her head, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the railing tighter. "He's here," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I know he is. I can feel him." Victor glanced at me, his expression unreadable. Then, gently, he placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll find him," he said. "But you need to let us handle this." She looked up at him then, her eyes brimming with tears. For a moment, I thought she might argue. But finally, she nodded, her shoulders sagging with the weight of her grief. "Please," she whispered. "Bring him back." Victor didn't respond. He simply tipped his hat and turned away, motioning for me to follow. As we walked, I couldn't help but notice the way the crowd parted for him, as though they sensed the gravity of his presence. When we reached the carousel, Victor didn't hesitate. He stepped onto the platform as it spun, his boots striking the wooden planks with purpose. I hesitated for a moment before following, the motion of the ride unsettling my balance. Up close, the horses seemed even more grotesque, their painted eyes too lifelike, their postures too animated. The white horse with the golden manet stood out among them, its chipped paint glinting under the carousel's lights. Victor circled it slowly, his hand skimming over its surface. His fingers paused at the base of the saddle, where the strange symbols I'd noted earlier were etched into the wood. He traced them with his fingertips, his brow furrowing. "These aren't just decorative," he said, more to himself than to me. "They're deliberate. Intentional." I crouched beside him, studying the carvings closely. They were intricate, almost hypnotic in their detail. "Ritualistic?" I suggested. "Possibly," he replied. "But there's more to it than that." Before I could ask what he meant, a sudden noise cut through the air, a low, guttural groan that seemed to resonate from the very core of the carousel. The ride jerked beneath us, and I stumbled, catching myself on the railing. "What the hell was that?" I asked, my voice shaking. Victor didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the white horse, his jaw tightening. "Get off," he said sharply. What? Get off the carousel. Now. I didn't argue. I scrambled back onto solid ground, my heart pounding as the ride groaned again, its motion slowing to an unnatural crawl. Victor remained where he was, his hand resting on the white horse's mane as he muttered something under his breath. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the noise stopped. The carousel fell still, its lights flickering before resuming their steady glow. Victor stepped off the platform, his expression darker than I'd ever seen it. "This isn't just a ride," he said, his voice low. "It's a trap." Victor's declaration that the carousel was a trap hung heavy in the air between us as we weaved through the crowd, my mind racing to process his words. The evening festivities were in full swing now, and the energy of the carnival surged around us like a living beast. Laughter and applause erupted from the nearby game booths, punctuated by the occasional pop of a balloon or the metallic clang of a bell being struck. Yet, amid all the noise, I couldn't shake the oppressive stillness that clung to my chest, a visceral weight that whispered of unseen eyes watching our every move. Victor led the way, his shoulders taut and his gaze locked ahead. He moved like a predator stalking its prey, his steps purposeful and deliberate. I followed close behind, struggling to keep up with his long strides while clutching my notebook as if it could somehow shield me from the growing unease curling in my gut. The carousel's golden glow loomed behind us, its painted horses frozen mid-leap, their eyes gleaming with a malevolence that felt all too real. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice low enough to avoid attracting attention. "To the only person left who might tell us the truth," Victor replied, his tone clipped. I knew better than to press him for details. Victor had a way of keeping his thoughts to himself until he was certain of his next move, and I'd learned to trust his instincts even when they led us into the darkest corners of the unknown. The performer in the crimson gown was hard to find amid the swirling chaos of the carnival, but Victor's determination was unrelenting. He navigated the labyrinth of tents and booths with a single-minded focus that left little room for doubt. As we turned a corner near the Ferris wheel, I spotted her at last, the woman from earlier, her scarlet dress catching the light like a flame in the shadows. She was speaking with another performer, her gestures sharp and frantic, but the moment she caught sight of Victor approaching, her face paled, and she took a step back. "Miss," Victor called out, his voice calm but firm. "A word." She glanced at the man beside her, who gave her a wary nod before retreating into the crowd. Alone now, she squared her shoulders and met Victor's gaze with an air of defiance that barely masked her fear. "I've already told you everything I know," she said, though her voice wavered. Victor stopped a few feet from her, his hands resting loosely at his sides. "I think you've told me what you're willing to say," he replied evenly. "But we both know there's more." She opened her mouth to respond, but I cut in before she could. "A boy vanished tonight," I said, my words tumbling out in a rush. "Right in front of his mother. And from what we've gathered, he's not the first. If you know something that could help us find him, anything at all, you have to tell us." Her eyes flicked to mine, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of sympathy. But then her jaw tightened, and she shook her head. "You don't understand," she said. "It's not that simple." Victor stepped closer, his presence towering. "Try us." She hesitated, her gaze darting around as if searching for an escape. But there was none to be found. With a resigned sigh, she lowered her voice and leaned in slightly. "It's the carousel," she said, her words barely audible. "It's alive, or at least, it feels like it is. It feeds off something dark. I don't know what exactly, but I've seen what it does." People go missing, and no one questions it. No one wants to. Her confession sent a chill down my spine, and I scribbled her words into my notebook as quickly as I could. Why hasn't anyone stopped it? I asked, my voice hushed. The owner won't let anyone near it, she replied bitterly. He says it's the Carnival's heart, that without it, everything would fall apart. But I think he knows the truth. He has to. Victor's expression darkened. Who built it? I don't know, she admitted, shaking her head. It's been here longer than I have, longer than most of us. The stories say it was made by someone who shouldn't have been meddling with things they didn't understand. But that's all I know. I swear. Victor studied her for a long moment, his gaze unreadable. Then, finally, he nodded. Thank you, he said quietly. She exhaled a shaky breath, relief washing over her face. If you're smart, you'll leave, she said, her voice wavering. Whatever you think you're going to find, it's not worth it. With that, she turned and disappeared into the crowd, leaving us standing in the shadows of the Ferris wheel. Victor remained still, his gaze fixed on the spot where she'd stood, his mind clearly turning over her words. Do you believe her? I asked after a moment. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the torn diagram we'd taken from Benny's trailer, holding it up to the light. I believe she's scared, he said finally. And I believe she's right about one thing, the answers we're looking for won't come without a cost. We spent the rest of the evening gathering what information we could, though the Carnival workers were tight-lipped, their fear of the owner keeping them from saying much. The crowd began to thin as the hour grew late, and the festive energy of the Carnival gave way to a quieter, almost somber atmosphere. Even the calliope music seemed to slow, its once jaunty notes now dragging like the final breaths of a dying beast. Victor and I returned to the carousel just as it was shutting down for the night. The golden lights flickered once before extinguishing, leaving the ride bathed in shadow. Up close, it seemed larger than ever, its ornate carvings twisted and grotesque in the dim light. Victor stepped onto the platform, his boots echoing against the wood as he approached the white horse with the golden manet. I followed hesitantly, my pulse quickening as the oppressive weight of the ride pressed down on me. This is where it starts, Victor said, his voice low. Whatever this thing is, whoever built it, they left their mark. And we're going to find it. His words hung in the air as he crouched beside the horse, his fingers tracing the intricate symbols carved into its base. I knelt beside him, my notebook open as I jotted down every detail I could. And then, as my pen scratched against the paper, I felt it, a faint vibration beneath my knees, like the hum of a distant engine. I froze, my breath hitching. Victor, I whispered. Do you feel that? He didn't respond. Instead, he pressed his palm flat against the wood, his jaw tightening. The vibration grew stronger, a low, rhythmic pulse that seemed to resonate through the entire carousel. And then, without warning, the ride groaned to life. The vibration of the carousel resonated through my knees, climbing up my spine like an electric charge. It wasn't just the sound, it was a feeling, a deep hum that settled in the marrow of my bones and refused to let go. Victor's jaw was tight, his palm pressed firmly against the white horse with the golden manet, and I could tell he was fighting the impulse to pull away. But he didn't. Instead, he leaned closer, his breath steady as he examined the carvings with renewed intensity. It's waking up, he murmured, his voice barely audible over the groaning of the wooden machinery. Waking up? I echoed, my voice trembling despite my efforts to appear composed. What do you mean? Victor didn't answer right away. He kept his hand on the horse's flank, tracing the intricate symbols etched into its surface. The carvings seemed to pulse faintly under his touch, their lines shimmering with an unnatural light that made my stomach turn. Finally, he spoke, his tone grim and deliberate. It's alive, he said. Not in the way a living creature is, but in the way fire breathes or tides shift. It's feeding off something, energy, maybe even life itself, and it's growing stronger. My breath hitched, and I took an involuntary step back. You're saying it's sentient? Victor glanced at me, his expression hard to read. Not quite sentient, he replied. But it has purpose. And whatever it's trying to accomplish, it's nearly there. The hum grew louder, and the carousel shuddered beneath us, its painted horses seeming to leap forward in a stuttered motion. I grabbed the railing for support, my fingers digging into the splintered wood. Victor remained where he was, unwavering, his eyes fixed on the carvings as if they held the key to unraveling the ride's mysteries. Then, suddenly, the carousel stopped. The vibration ceased, and the oppressive weight that had been pressing down on me lifted slightly. I exhaled shakily, glancing around as the world seemed to return to normal, or at least, as normal as it could be in a place like this. Victor straightened, his hand dropping from the horse's flank. We need answers, he said, his voice steady but laced with urgency. And we won't find them standing here. We left the carousel and made our way toward the Carnival's central hub, where the tents and booths were arranged in a chaotic sprawl. The crowd had thinned considerably, but the lingering presence of workers and late-night revelers gave the area a sense of restless activity. The air was cooler now, though the tension between Victor and me was palpable, an unspoken weight that neither of us addressed. Victor led the way, his stride purposeful as he scanned the area for the owner's trailer. Benny's words echoed in my mind, cryptic statements about rituals and stolen designs, and I couldn't help but wonder what sort of man would willingly unleash something so dangerous. There, Victor said, nodding toward a large, ornate tent at the far edge of the grounds. It stood apart from the other tents, its crimson fabric billowing slightly in the breeze. The gilded trim along its edges shimmered under the moonlight, giving it an air of opulence that felt out of place amid the carnival's otherwise ramshackle aesthetic. That's his? I asked, my voice low. Victor nodded. It has to be. As we approached the tent, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Shadows danced along the fabric, their movements too deliberate to be tricks of the light. The hum of voices carried faintly from inside, and I felt my pulse quicken as Victor stepped forward and pulled the flap aside. The interior of the tent was lavish, almost garish in its excess. Velvet curtains lined the walls, and the floor was covered in richly patterned rugs that muffled the sound of our footsteps. A large desk sat at the center of the space, its surface cluttered with papers, ledgers, and an assortment of odd objects, a pocket watch, a carved figurine, and a small vial of what looked like ash. A single lantern hung from the ceiling, casting flickering light over the scene. The owner stood behind the desk, his stout frame outlined by the lantern's glow. He was a short man with slicked back hair and a face like a bulldog, his expression sour as he looked up from his papers. His eyes narrowed as he took in our presence, and he crossed his arms over his chest, his stance defensive. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice sharp. Victor didn't flinch. He stepped closer, his gaze steady as he regarded the man with cold intensity. "We have questions," he said simply. The owner snorted, his lip curling in disdain. Questions? About what? The carousel, Victor replied. And the boy who disappeared tonight. The owner's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. I don't know what you're talking about. Victor's voice remained calm, but his tone sharpened. Don't play coy. We know about the disappearances, the deaths. And we know they all trace back to the carousel. The owner's eyes flicked to me, then back to Victor. For a moment, he said nothing, his lips pressed into a thin line. Finally, he exhaled heavily, his shoulders sagging. You don't understand, he muttered, shaking his head. It's not what you think. Then tell us, Victor said. Make us understand. The owner hesitated, his gaze darting to the papers on his desk. His fingers twitched, and I could see the conflict etched into his features, fear, anger, perhaps even regret. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost resigned. The carousel wasn't built for this, he said. It was meant to be something else. Something beautiful. What changed? Victor asked. The owner's eyes hardened. Greed. It was stolen from the man who built it, the man who poured his soul into it. The people who took it, they twisted it. They made it hungry. Hungry for what? I asked, my voice trembling. Life, he replied simply. It feeds on people, their energy, their essence. And the more it feeds, the stronger it becomes. Victor's jaw tightened. You knew this? The owner didn't deny it. He looked away, his hands clenching into fists. I tried to stop it, he said. But I couldn't. It's too powerful now, too far gone. Victor stepped closer, his presence imposing. There's always a way, he said. And you're going to help us find it. The owner's gaze snapped to Victor, his fear giving way to anger. Do you have any idea what you're dealing with? He spat. It's not just a machine, it's a curse. You can't fight it. You can't destroy it. Victor didn't waver. We'll see about that. Victor's posture remained rigid as he stepped out of the crimson tent, his steps purposeful yet measured. The Carnival's kaleidoscopic lights flickered behind us, their glow almost mocking in its artificial cheerfulness. The air felt heavier than before, each breath laden with the unspoken weight of what we'd uncovered. I followed him closely, the echoes of the owner's words rattling in my mind like loose change. A curse. Hunger. Life. My stomach churned, and the Carnival's music grated against my senses like nails on a chalkboard. Victor didn't speak, his silence palpable as we wound our way back through the maze of tents. His brow was furrowed, the brim of his hat casting a shadow over his sharp features. I wanted to ask what he was thinking, to pull answers from the labyrinth of his mind, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the set of his jaw, or the way his hands curled into fists. Whatever it was, I knew better than to interrupt. When we reached the carousel, I felt the pull of its presence more strongly than ever, a magnetic force that seemed to draw the very air toward its spinning center. The golden lights glinted off its ornate carvings, illuminating the painted horses frozen mid-leap. The white horse with the golden mane stood out among them, its chipped paint gleaming like tarnished gold in the shadows. Victor stopped just short of the platform, his gaze fixed on the carousel's intricate mechanisms. Lucien, he said, his voice low and steady. Take a look at the ground. I blinked, startled by his request. The ground? He nodded, gesturing to the dirt surrounding the base of the carousel. Focus on the patterns. Look closely. I crouched beside him, my notebook tucked under my arm, and studied the earth. At first, it appeared unremarkable, just dry soil pressed down by the countless footsteps of carnival goers. But as I adjusted my angle, the faint outlines of something more deliberate began to emerge. Circles. Symbols. A series of interconnected shapes that seemed etched into the dirt itself, their edges precise and unbroken. What is this? I stammered, tracing the lines with my fingertips. A ritual, Victor replied, his tone even. This carousel isn't just cursed, it's an anchor. An anchor. The word hung in the air, heavy with implications I couldn't yet grasp. I scribbled the shapes into my notebook, my pen trembling as I tried to replicate their detail. The symbols weren't ones I recognized, but there was a rhythm to them, a strange symmetry that felt both deliberate and alien. Victor crouched beside me, his fingers brushing against the largest circle. These markings, they are connected to the carvings on the carousel's horses. Whoever built this knew exactly what they were doing. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. What does it anchor, though? What's it holding here? Victor didn't answer right away. His eyes were distant, his thoughts spiraling into the dark corners of possibilities I couldn't reach. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter than before. Something old. Something hungry. We stayed by the carousel for hours, our investigation stretching into the dead of night. The carnival had begun to close, its music fading into silence as workers dismantled booths and tents. The crowd dispersed, leaving behind only remnants of laughter and the occasional murmur of voices. Yet, the carousel remained illuminated, its golden lights casting long shadows across the deserted grounds. Victor worked methodically, examining the carousel's mechanisms with the precision of a surgeon. He tested the gears, traced the carvings, and studied the interplay between the markings on the ground and the machinery itself. Meanwhile, I focused on my notebook, piecing together the fragments of information we'd gathered so far, the stolen designs, the twisted intent, the pulsing energy beneath our feet. There's a pattern here, Victor said suddenly, his voice breaking the silence. Look at the carvings on the white horse's saddle. I stepped closer, my pulse quickening as I studied the intricate designs. At first glance, they appeared decorative, their swirling shapes blending seamlessly into the saddle's edges. But as I examined them more closely, I saw it, the subtle repetition of symbols, their placement almost identical to the markings in the dirt. The connection was undeniable. Victor straightened, his expression grim. It's not just a curse, it's a summoning. My breath hitched. Summoning? Summoning what? Victor's jaw tightened, his gaze darkening. Whatever created this, whatever fed the craftsmen their knowledge, it wasn't human. And it wants to return. We were interrupted by the sound of footsteps, a heavy, deliberate rhythm that broke through the stillness like a gunshot. I turned sharply, my heart leaping into my throat as Benny emerged from the shadows. His face was pale, his hands trembling as he clutched a rusted toolbox to his chest. I told you, he muttered, his voice shaky. I told you not to get involved. Victor didn't flinch. He stepped toward Benny, his presence commanding. What do you know about the markings? He asked, gesturing to the circles in the dirt. Benny hesitated, his gaze darting between Victor and me. They're part of the design, he admitted finally. I copied them from the original blueprints. The owner said they were important, but he wouldn't tell me why. Victor's eyes narrowed. And you didn't think to ask? Benny's shoulders sagged, his grip on the toolbox loosening. I didn't want to know. I figured it was just decoration, you know? Something to make it look fancy. Victor studied Benny for a long moment, his gaze unyielding. Then, he turned to me, his expression resolute. Lucien, we're running out of time. I blinked, startled by the urgency in his voice. What do you mean? Victor motioned to the carousel, its light still glowing despite the emptiness of the carnival grounds. That energy we felt earlier, it's building. And if we don't stop it, whatever's feeding this ride is going to break through. Victor's plan was audacious, bordering on reckless. He wanted to dismantle the carousel, to break its connection to the markings in the dirt and disrupt whatever ritual had been etched into its machinery. Benny was reluctant to help, but Victor's unwavering determination proved persuasive, and the mechanic grudgingly agreed to lend his expertise. The three of us worked in tense silence, our movements quick and calculated as we removed panels and disconnected gears. Benny guided us through the mechanics, his hands surprisingly steady despite the fear in his eyes. Victor focused on the carvings, using a pocket knife to chip away at the symbols etched into the wood. I documented everything, my pen scratching against the pages of my notebook in frantic strokes. With each piece we removed, the carousel seemed to groan louder, its vibrations intensifying until the ground beneath us began to tremble. The lights flickered violently, casting chaotic shadows across the dismantled ride. And then, as Benny pried loose the final gear, the carousel let out a deafening roar, a sound so primal and guttural that it felt like it came from the earth itself. The lights extinguished, plunging us into darkness. Darkness enveloped us after the carousel's deafening roar ceased. The air was thick with anticipation, as though the ground itself had been holding its breath, waiting for something to rise from the depths. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning out the faint metallic creaks of the dismantled ride. I clutched my notebook, the paper damp under my sweating palms, unsure whether to brace myself for an explosion or collapse. Victor didn't hesitate. His flashlight clicked on, the beam slicing through the void like a lance. The golden-painted horses gleamed eerily under the light, their carved bodies frozen mid-stride, but somehow still exuding the energy of predatory creatures. Victor's eyes narrowed, scanning the scene with the precision of a hawk. There was no doubt now, we had provoked something far beyond comprehension. "Lucien, stay close," he muttered, his voice cutting through the oppressive silence. I nodded, trailing behind him as he approached the carousel's core. Benny, trembling like a leaf caught in a gale, had flattened himself against the railing, his toolbox abandoned at his feet. His eyes darted from Victor to the ride, his mouth opening and closing as if he were trying to scream but lacked the breath. Victor turned toward him, his tone sharp. "Benny, what's beneath it?" Benny's pupils blew wide, and his voice cracked. I don't know. The blueprints, they didn't show." Victor cut him off with a glare. "Stay here. And keep watch." As Victor stepped onto the carousel platform, the flashlight's beam illuminated the intricate markings etched into the wood. I followed hesitantly, clutching my notebook like it might provide some semblance of protection. The carvings on the white horse's base pulsed faintly in the light, their faint glow almost hypnotic. Victor crouched beside them, running his fingers along the grooves with a careful, deliberate touch. "Something's binding it," he said, his tone low but purposeful. "Not just the carvings. Something deeper." Beneath the platform, the faint hum of vibrations began again, growing louder with every second. I braced myself against the railing as the carousel shuddered, the groan of its mechanism sending shockwaves through the floorboards. Victor rose, his flashlight beam locking onto a trapdoor hidden between the central poles. "Help me with this," he ordered, his voice cutting through the noise. I hesitated for half a heartbeat before stepping forward, the trembling platform making every movement feel precarious. Together, we heated the trapdoor, its rusted hinges groaning in protest before snapping free. What lay beneath stopped my breath cold. The pit stretched into the abyss. A twisting mass of roots and metal pulsed and writhed at its center, glowing faintly with the same rhythmic light as the carvings. The roots appeared alive, weaving through the soil and machinery, exuding an aura of raw, unrelenting hunger. Victor held the flashlight steady, his expression grim as the magnitude of what we faced hit like a gut punch. "It's alive," I whispered, my voice shaking. "The carousel, it's feeding it." Victor didn't answer. He knelt beside the pit, his eyes tracing the chaotic network of roots and cables. His flashlight beam caught glimpses of symbols etched into the metal framework, ancient, indecipherable, yet undeniably deliberate. I gripped the edge of the trapdoor, peering over his shoulder, my mind scrambling to make sense of what I was seeing. "This is the anchor," Victor said, his tone heavy. "This machine, it's not just cursed. It's a doorway." "A doorway to what?" My voice cracked as I spoke, though the answer already hung unspoken between us. Victor's jaw tightened. "To whatever it serves. Whatever it summoned when it was built." The humming beneath the carousel grew louder, resonating like a chant, an unholy invocation rising from the depths of the pit. Benny stumbled onto the platform, his eyes wide with terror. "You have to stop it," he choked out. "If it wakes up, it'll take everything." Victor rose sharply, his flashlight beam locking onto Benny. "How do we stop it?" I don't know." "The markings, the carvings, maybe destroy them." Benny's voice reached a shrill pitch, his fear spilling out in disjointed fragments. Victor didn't hesitate. He pulled the pocket knife from his coat and plunged it into the white horse's flank, chipping away at the carvings with fierce precision. Each stroke of the blade sent sparks flying, the glow of the symbols dimming under his assault. The carousel groaned, its structure shaking violently as the markings were defaced. I scrambled to Benny's toolbox, my hands fumbling through its contents until I found a wrench. Adrenaline surged through me as I began hacking at the carved saddle, the rhythmic hum in the pit escalating to a deafening roar. The ground trembled beneath us, and I felt the air shift, a cold, unnatural breeze cutting through the sweltering night. And then the carousel screamed. The sound wasn't mechanical, it was primal, a guttural cry that seemed to tear through reality itself. The white horse's head snapped forward, its painted jaws gaping wide as the carvings on its flank melted into darkness. Beneath the platform, the pit erupted in a surge of light and shadow, the roots twisting violently as the doorway threatened to open. Victor shouted over the chaos, his voice commanding. "Lucien, get off the platform." I didn't have time to think. I stumbled backward, wrench in hand, as the carousel bucked and shook with furious energy. Victor followed close behind, his knife gripped tightly as he leapt onto solid ground. Benny scrambled after us, his toolbox clattering against the wood. The humming in the pit reached a crescendo, the light pulsating so brightly that I had to shield my eyes. And then, without warning, the carousel collapsed. The structure crumbled inward, its ornate poles and painted horses sucked into the pit in a violent implosion. The groaning machinery and twisting roots screamed as they were swallowed by the earth, their glow extinguished in an instant. The trapdoor snapped shut with a resounding clang, leaving behind only silence. I collapsed onto the dirt, my breath ragged as the weight of what we'd done settled over me. The air was still now, the oppressive hum replaced by a profound quiet that felt deafening in its own way. Victor stood beside me, his coat dusted with dirt, his expression grim but resolute. "We stopped it," he said, his voice steady. "But it's not gone." I stared at him, unable to form words. The pit was sealed, the carousel destroyed, but the weight of its presence lingered, an unspoken promise that whatever lay beneath would wait for another opportunity to rise. As the carnival workers began to emerge from the shadows, their faces etched with confusion and fear, Victor helped me to my feet. Benny stumbled away, muttering to himself, his trembling hands clutching the remnants of his toolbox. The carnival's lights flickered faintly as the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, bathing the grounds in pale, cleansing light. Victor turned to me, his gaze unwavering. "Come on, Lucien. There's nothing left for us here." I nodded silently, clutching my notebook as we walked away from the ruins of the Crimson Carnival. The echoes of its haunting melody followed us into the rising sun, a reminder of the shadows that had claimed this place and the darkness that still lingered beneath the surface. Thank you for joining us on this harrowing journey through the Crimson Carnival. The shadows may have lifted, but the whispers of the unknown linger, reminding us that some mysteries are better left undisturbed. Detective Victor Graves and Lucien Drake risked it all to peer beyond the veil, and while the darkness may have retreated for now, it will never truly be gone. If you enjoyed this chilling tale and want more spine-tingling cases from the darker corners of the world, don't forget to like this video to show your support. Share it with fellow seekers of the strange. And subscribe to the Twisted CaseFiles for more tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Stay tuned for our next story. It promises to unravel more secrets, explore deeper shadows, and challenge what you think you know.